When we speak of the relationship between man and woman, we are not merely describing social customs or external behaviors. We are entering into a dialogue with the deepest layers of the psyche, where archetypal forces of anima and animus shape the way we relate, love, and wound one another. To understand what a man must never do with a woman is not simply to follow rules of conduct, but to recognize the fragile balance between the conscious ego and the unconscious projections that arise in intimacy. Much of the suffering between men and women comes from ignorance of these psychic realities, where a man burdens a woman with the weight of his shadow, or denies her symbolic role as a mirror of his own unconscious life. In these moments, the man does not meet the woman as she is, but as a distorted image of his own unresolved conflicts. To approach a woman with reverence and psychological awareness is therefore not merely a matter of respect for her, but of respect for the archetypal forces she embodies. Only when a man refrains from destructive patterns rooted in shadow, projection, and domination can he enter into a relationship that is whole, authentic, and transformative. Projecting the shadow onto women and mistaking inner conflict for outer reality is one of the most profound errors a man can make, for it not only distorts his perception of women, but also traps him in a cycle of misunderstanding, frustration, and repeated suffering. Jung defined the shadow as the repository of all that the ego does not wish to acknowledge, the rejected impulses, fears, desires, and weaknesses that remain hidden in the unconscious. The shadow is not evil in itself, though it often carries qualities judged as negative by the conscious mind. It is simply the unintegrated, the denied, the unexplored. When a man is unaware of his shadow, he unconsciously projects it onto those around him, often onto women, because women symbolically carry the anima, the inner feminine, which is itself a bridge to the unconscious. Thus, instead of meeting a woman as she is, he sees her through the distorted lens of his own unresolved psychic material. This projection can take many forms. A man who represses his aggression may see a woman as hostile or critical, even when she is not. A man who denies his own vulnerability may perceive a woman as overly needy or weak, because he cannot bear to face those qualities within himself. A man who struggles with unacknowledged desires may cast a woman as temptress or seductress, holding her responsible for the impulses he refuses to own. In each case, the woman becomes a mirror onto which the man throws his shadow, and she is burdened with qualities that belong to his own psyche. This is deeply unjust to the woman, who is no longer seen for who she is, but as a vessel for the man's inner conflicts. It is also destructive to the man, for he robs himself of the opportunity to confront and integrate his shadow, instead externalizing it and perpetuating his disconnection from the unconscious. Jung emphasized that projection is one of the greatest obstacles in relationships, for it creates illusions. A man convinced that his projections are real becomes trapped in a hall of mirrors, responding not to the woman before him, but to his own disowned material. If he believes she is overly controlling, he may rebel against her, failing to see that it is his own fear of dependence that distorts his view. If he sees her as judgmental, he may retreat into defensiveness, unaware that it is his own inner critic reflected outward. The relationship then becomes a battleground for the man's unresolved conflicts, and the woman is forced into roles that have nothing to do with her true self. This dynamic erodes trust and intimacy, for the woman feels unseen, and the man continues to battle ghosts of his own making. Projection of the shadow also explains the sudden reversals that can occur in romantic relationships. A man may begin by idealizing a woman, seeing her as perfect, angelic, a savior of his loneliness. This idealization is itself a projection rooted in his denial of his own wholeness and his longing for completion. Yet inevitably, when the unconscious demands recognition, the projection shifts. The same woman who was once idealized becomes demonized, criticized, and resented. She becomes the embodiment of everything he cannot accept about himself. The rapid swing from adoration to contempt is the mark of shadow projection, for the man has not yet learned to see the woman as she is, complex, human, neither savior nor enemy, but a partner with her own individuality. Instead, he has mistaken his own psychic drama for external reality, and the relationship collapses under the weight of his illusions. At the heart of this error is the refusal to own one's inner life. To project the shadow onto women is to deny responsibility for one's own psyche, to insist that the problem lies outside rather than within. This denial prevents growth, for the shadow contains not only what is rejected, but also what is needed for wholeness. The aggression, vulnerability, desire, and fear that the man refuses to acknowledge are precisely the qualities that, when integrated, would enrich his personality and deepen his relationships. By projecting them, he keeps them at arm's length, and he remains fragmented. The woman becomes the battleground upon which his psychic struggle plays out, but the real conflict is within. Until he recognizes this, he will repeat the pattern with one woman after another, never finding satisfaction, always blaming the external world for the turmoil of his inner life. The psychological harm to women in such dynamics is also profound. When a man projects his shadow, the woman is cast into a role she did not choose. She may be treated as if she is critical, manipulative, or seductive. Even when she is not, she may be punished for qualities that are not hers but his. Over time, she may internalize these projections, questioning herself, doubting her worth, or reacting defensively to accusations that have no basis in her reality. In this way, projection not only harms the man, but wounds the woman, creating patterns of mistrust and distortion that ripple through the relationship. Jung noted that when projection is withdrawn, relationships can become authentic, for each person is seen as they truly are. Until then, the woman is not encountered as a subject in her own right, but as a screen for the man's inner film. There is also a cultural dimension to this phenomenon. Collective shadows often fall upon women, shaped by centuries of patriarchal attitudes, religious doctrines, and societal fears. Women have been demonized as witches, blamed for men's temptations, or idealized as pure mothers, stripped of their complexity. These collective projections are not merely personal but archetypal, woven into the fabric of cultural myths and collective unconscious patterns. When a man projects his shadow onto a woman, he may be unconsciously participating in these larger dynamics, casting her into roles shaped by cultural archetypes rather than individual reality. Thus, projection of the shadow is not only a personal error, but a collective one, perpetuating patterns of misunderstanding between the sexes that span generations. The work of individuation requires that a man withdraw his projections and face his shadow directly. This is not easy, for it demands humility, courage, and honesty. It requires him to admit that what he sees in the woman may, in fact, belong to himself. It calls him to recognize his anger, his fear, his vulnerability, his desires, not as faults to be denied, but as parts of himself to be integrated. In this process, the woman is liberated from the burden of carrying his shadow, and the man is liberated from the illusions that distort his perception. The relationship then becomes a meeting of two individuals rather than a battleground of projections. The woman is seen as she is, and the man discovers aspects of himself that enrich his wholeness. What once appeared as outer conflict is revealed as inner conflict, and in recognizing this, he gains the possibility of authentic connection. The symbolism of projection also reveals itself in the body. A man who projects his shadow often carries tension, rigidity, or defensiveness in his posture, for he is constantly battling external enemies that are in fact internal. His body betrays the strain of disconnection from himself. When he begins to withdraw projection and integrate his shadow, the body relaxes, the face softens, and vitality returns. The woman he once accused of causing his suffering appears less threatening, because the true source of conflict has been acknowledged within. Thus, the withdrawal of projection is not only a psychological event, but also a somatic one, visibly altering the man's presence and transforming the energy of the relationship. Projection of the shadow onto women also prevents the man from experiencing the true depth of the anima. The anima, as Jung described, is the inner feminine principle, the bridge between ego and unconscious, the source of creativity, feeling, and relatedness. When the shadow is projected, the anima is obscured, distorted by the man's disarmed qualities. Instead of encountering the anima as a guide to the depths of his own psyche, he misreads her through the figure of the woman, demanding from her what she cannot provide. He may expect her to complete him, to save him, or to embody perfection, all of which are unrealistic projections. Only when he withdraws projection does he recognize that the anima is within him. The qualities he seeks in women are actually aspects of his own psyche waiting to be integrated. In this recognition, he frees women from impossible expectations and enters into authentic relationship both with them and with himself. The tragedy of shadow projection is that it prevents real love. Love requires seeing the other as they are, not as a reflection of one's unconscious. When a man projects, he cannot truly love, for he does not see the woman. He sees only himself, distorted and externalized. The withdrawal of projection, difficult though it is therefore the necessary foundation for authentic love. It is the path by which a man ceases to mistake inner conflict for outer reality and learns to meet women not as carriers of his shadow, but as individuals with their own depth, autonomy, and wholeness. Only then does he step out of the hall of mirrors and into the reality of genuine relationship, where the woman is no longer burdened with his disowned material, and he is no longer condemned to fight his own shadow in her form. Denying the symbolic role of the anima and reducing women to mere objects of desire or control is one of the most destructive patterns a man can fall into, for it represents not only a failure to recognize the humanity of women, but also a failure to engage with the deepest dimensions of his own psyche. In Jungian psychology, the anima is the inner feminine within the male psyche, the principle of feeling, intuition, imagination, and relatedness thus, that acts as a bridge between the conscious ego and the vast unconscious. She appears in dreams, in fantasies, in projections upon women, carrying qualities that the man has not yet recognized in himself. To deny her symbolic role is to deny the reality of this inner dimension, to reduce the profound archetypal mystery of the feminine to a superficial objectification. When this occurs, women cease to be encountered as individuals or as carriers of archetypal wisdom, and instead become flattened into functions, sources of pleasure, objects of conquest, or vessels of control. This denial wounds both the woman, who is stripped of her complexity, and the man, who remains alienated from his own inner life. The anima is not simply a psychological idea. She is an archetype, a timeless pattern in the collective unconscious that governs how men relate to their inner and outer feminine worlds. When acknowledged and engaged, she brings depth, creativity, and meaning. She enriches relationships by opening the man to feeling, empathy, and the capacity to connect beyond the limitations of ego. She animates imagination, inspiring art, spirituality, and dreams that lead the man into greater wholeness. But when denied, she acts destructively. The man who rejects the anima becomes one-dimensional, overly rational, rigid, and emotionally stunted. He loses touch with the depths of his psyche, living only on the surface of intellect and control. In relationships, this manifests as an inability to see women as subjects with their own autonomy. Instead, he sees them as mirrors of his own egoic needs, as objects to possess or manipulate. This reduction not only impoverishes the woman, but also starves the man of the very qualities his soul longs for. The reduction of women to objects of desire is perhaps the most obvious manifestation of this denial. In such cases, the man relates not to the woman's individuality, but to the projection of his own repressed qualities. He seeks beauty, sexuality, or validation from her without acknowledging the symbolic dimension she represents. She becomes a tool to satisfy instinct rather than a partner in the deeper journey of individuation. The problem is not desire itself, which is natural and human, but the refusal to see beyond it. Desire, when integrated with respect for the anima, can be a source of intimacy and creative energy. But when divorced from the anima, it devolves into objectification, draining relationships of soul and leaving both participants empty. The man, in denying the anima, feeds only his instincts, while the woman, reduced to a function, is robbed of her true presence. Control is another form of this denial. When a man refuses to acknowledge the anima, he often fears her influence, for the unconscious always exerts power when ignored. To suppress this influence, he may attempt to control women externally, imposing domination, rules, expectations. In truth, he is attempting to master his own unconscious by mastering the outer woman. The fear of emotional depth, of surrender, of vulnerability becomes translated into control of the feminine. Yet this control never succeeds, for the anima cannot be subdued by force. She responds only to acknowledgement and integration. The more the man seeks to dominate women, the more his own unconscious erupts in neurosis, projection, and inner unrest. The outward attempt at control reflects the inward refusal to engage, and both lead to fragmentation. Dreams reveal the consequences of this denial. Jung observed that when a man refuses to recognize the anima, she often appears in dreams as negative figures, seductresses, witches, deceivers, or cold, distant women. These figures are not literal representations of women, but symbolic images of the man's distorted relationship to his inner feminine. He has denied her role, and she appears as destructive, reflecting his own alienation. If, however, he begins to engage with her symbolically, she transforms, appearing as a guide, a muse, or a wise companion, leading him deeper into his psyche. The treatment of women in outer life and the images of women in dreams are intertwined, both reflecting the man's relationship to the anima. To reduce women to objects is to invite destructive manifestations of the anima. To honor them as symbols is to open the possibility of transformation. The cultural implications of this denial are vast. Entire societies have reduced women to objects or instruments, denying their autonomy and symbolic role. Patriarchal systems often reflect the collective repression of the anima, creating structures of domination where women are controlled, silenced, or idealized into roles of mother or virgin, stripped of their complexity. Such cultures, like individuals, pay the price. They lose access to feeling, imagination, and balance. They overvalue rationality, power, and control, while undervaluing empathy, creativity, and relational depth. The denial of the anima at the collective level manifests in cultural sterility, emotional poverty, and spiritual emptiness. Jung believed that modern society suffered precisely from this imbalance, and that the renewal of culture required the reintegration of the feminine principle. On a personal level, the man who reduces women to objects may achieve superficial satisfaction, but at the cost of deeper fulfillment. He may conquer or control, but he never truly encounters the soul of another. Relationships remain shallow, transactional, or fraught with power struggles. Over time, this leaves him restless, dissatisfied, and alienated, for the psyche longs for wholeness, not possession. The anima demands engagement, not denial. She calls the man to his depths, to vulnerability, to creativity, to love that transcends ego. To refuse her is to refuse one's own soul. The tragic irony is that in objectifying women, the man impoverishes himself most of all, cutting himself off from the source of renewal and meaning. Integration of the anima requires a different attitude. It requires that a man approach women not as objects, but as individuals who also carry symbolic meaning for his psyche. It requires that he see beyond instinctual desire and control, recognizing in his attraction, fascination, or fear the presence of archetypal energy calling him inward. When he feels captivated by a woman's beauty, he may ask himself what qualities within his own psyche remain unrecognized, waiting to be integrated. When he feels the urge to control, he may recognize that he is avoiding vulnerability, refusing to yield to the unconscious. By withdrawing projection and engaging symbolically, he honors both the woman and himself. She is seen in her humanity, and he discovers dimensions of his psyche that enrich his wholeness. The process is not easy, for the anima often resists conscious integration. She may seduce, confuse, or overwhelm the ego, pulling the man into emotional storms or fantasies. But these storms are invitations, not traps. They are the psyche's way of forcing the man to confront what he has denied. To navigate them, he must cultivate awareness, recognizing the anima's symbolic role rather than being swept away by literal interpretations. He must learn to see women not as embodiments of his fantasies or fears, but as individuals who may constellate archetypal energy within him. By making this distinction, he transforms relationships from projections into authentic encounters, and he transforms himself from a prisoner of the unconscious into a participant in individuation. When the anima is integrated, women are no longer reduced to objects of desire or control. They are honored as individuals and as mirrors of the archetypal feminine within. The man gains access to empathy, creativity, and imagination, qualities that enliven his life and relationships. He no longer fears vulnerability, for he has made peace with his inner feminine. He no longer seeks to dominate, for he recognizes that true strength lies in dialogue, not in control. His relationships become deeper, infused with soul, because he meets women not as objects, but as subjects, as partners in the shared journey of individuation. This transformation enriches both partners, for the woman is freed from objectification and the man is freed from alienation. In recognizing the anima, he recognizes his own soul, and in doing so, he opens himself to love, creativity, and wholeness that transcend the superficiality of possession. Failing to engage women as equal participants in the individuation process and the search for wholeness reflects a misunderstanding of both relationship and the deeper dynamics of the psyche. Jung taught that individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious to realize the self, is not a solitary endeavor in isolation from others, but is profoundly influenced by relationships. Encounters with others, and especially with the opposite sex, mirror the archetypal forces within the psyche and provide opportunities for growth. To treat women as unequal, as subordinate, or as mere accessories to a man's journey is to miss the transformative role they play both psychologically and spiritually. When a man denies a woman's equality in this process, he limits not only her potential, but also his own, for he cuts himself off from the archetypal energies she constellates and from the possibility of authentic dialogue with the unconscious. At the heart of this issue lies the recognition that men and women both embody and carry aspects of the archetypal masculine and feminine. For a man, engaging a woman as equal means acknowledging that she is not simply an external presence, but a symbolic mirror of his anima, the inner feminine within his psyche. By treating her as equal, he allows himself to encounter and integrate his inner depths through the relationship. By treating her as inferior or secondary, he reduces her to an object and avoids confronting his own unconscious. This avoidance hinders individuation, for the psyche demands wholeness, and wholeness is impossible without the reconciliation of opposites. When a man fails to meet a woman as equal, he is in truth failing to meet his own inner feminine, and he remains incomplete. The dynamics of projection also play a role here. A man who sees a woman as unequal often projects his own disowned aspects onto her, casting her into roles that diminish her complexity. She becomes the caretaker, the temptress, the subordinate, or the idealized mother, depending on what the man refuses to recognize within himself. These projections rob her of individuality and rob him of the chance to withdraw projection and integrate the qualities she symbolizes. Engaging her as equal requires him to withdraw these projections and see her as she truly is, a person with her own inner life, her own struggles with individuation, and her own journey toward wholeness. By doing so, he not only honors her autonomy, but also deepens his own self-knowledge. The refusal to do so leaves both participants trapped in illusion. From a cultural perspective, the failure to engage women as equal participants reflects centuries of patriarchal structures that have denied women agency and autonomy. In many societies, women were excluded from intellectual, spiritual, and creative life, relegated to roles of service or reproduction. This cultural denial mirrors the psychological denial of the anima. Just as cultures have devalued women, men have devalued the feminine within themselves. The consequences are sterility, imbalance, and fragmentation both in culture and in individual psyches. Jung recognized that the renewal of culture depended on the reintegration of the feminine principle, both outwardly in social structures and inwardly in the psyche. To treat women as equal in the individuation process is therefore not merely a matter of fairness, but of psychological necessity for the health of both individuals and society. On the personal level, when a man does not treat a woman as an equal in his journey of growth, the relationship suffers. Dialogue is replaced by monologue, mutuality by domination, and intimacy by control. Instead of a partnership where each supports the other's individuation, the relationship becomes a hierarchy that stunts development. The woman may feel unseen, unvalued, or silenced, forced into roles that do not reflect her true self. The man, in turn, deprives himself of the richness of her perspective and the transformative energy of genuine encounter. Relationships of inequality stagnate because they lack the tension of opposites that fuels growth. Only when two individuals meet as equals, recognizing one another as whole beings, does the relationship become a crucible for individuation. Engaging women as equal also means acknowledging the archetypal reality of the feminine as a necessary complement to the masculine. The psyche, like the cosmos, is structured around polarity, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, rational and intuitive. To privilege one and devalue the other creates imbalance. In relationships, when a man assumes superiority, he privileges the masculine principle of logos, logic, structure, power, while denying the feminine principle of eros, connection, feeling, intuition. This imbalance leads to rigidity, sterility, and alienation. By engaging women as equal, he opens himself to the balancing power of eros, allowing feeling and connection to complement logic and structure. This balance is essential for individuation, for wholeness emerges only when opposites are reconciled. The symbolism of marriage in Jungian thought reflects this principle. Marriage, whether literal or symbolic, represents the union of opposites, the coming together of masculine and feminine to create wholeness. When a man engages a woman as equal, he participates in this symbolic marriage, both inwardly and outwardly. He allows the feminine within himself to find expression through the relationship, and he allows the woman her full humanity. When he fails to do so, marriage or any partnership becomes distorted, serving only the ego's desire for control. The archetypal potential of the union is lost, and the relationship becomes a stage for repetition of unconscious patterns rather than a vehicle for transformation. Dreams often reveal the consequences of this failure. A man who does not see women as equal may dream of female figures who are silent, diminished, or hostile. These dream figures symbolize the neglected anima, the feminine denied its voice. In contrast, when a man begins to engage women as equal, the anima appears in dreams as a guide, a muse, or a wise companion, leading him deeper into the unconscious. The imagery of dreams reflects the man's attitude toward the feminine, both within and without. By refusing equality, he silences the anima and is cut off from her guidance. By embracing equality, he opens himself to her wisdom and to the depths of his own psyche. The failure to engage women as equal participants also has consequences for creativity and spirituality. Jung observed that the anima is the source of inspiration, mediating between the unconscious and a conscious mind. Many artists, writers, and visionaries have encountered the anima as muse, the inner feminine who brings forth images, symbols, and ideas from the depths. To deny her or to reduce women to objects is to cut off the wellspring of creativity. Similarly, in spirituality, the anima serves as a guide to the mysteries of the unconscious, opening the path to transcendence and meaning. A man who refuses to engage women as equal and who denies the anima remains trapped in surface rationality, unable to access the symbolic richness of the soul. His life becomes dry, controlled, and unfulfilled because he has severed himself from the sources of renewal. At the collective level, this refusal has led to a crisis of meaning in modern culture. The dominance of rationalism, technology, and control reflects the privileging of masculine principles, while feeling, imagination, and relationality have been devalued. Women, too, have been marginalized, excluded from leadership, and denied equality. This collective imbalance mirrors the individual imbalance within the psyche. The way forward, Jung suggested, lies in the reintegration of the feminine, both in society and in the individual psyche. To treat women as equal in the individuation process is thus not only a matter of justice, but of survival, for without balance, both individuals and cultures collapse into sterility and despair. Engaging women as equal participants in individuation also transforms the very meaning of love. Love ceases to be possession or control and becomes dialogue, a meeting of two individuals who mirror and challenge one another in the search for wholeness. Each becomes a partner in the other's journey, reflecting unconscious material, offering new perspectives, and providing the tension that fuels growth. The man learns from the woman's encounter with her animus, just as she learns from his encounter with his anima. Each supports the other in withdrawing projections and integrating the unconscious. This is authentic love, not a merging that erases difference, but a partnership that honors difference while seeking unity. To deny women equality in this process is to deny the very essence of love as Jung understood it, the path toward individuation through relationship, ultimately failing to engage women as equal participants is a refusal of wholeness itself. It is to cling to the ego's illusion of superiority and control rather than submitting to the transformative demands of the unconscious. It is to live in imbalance, privileging logos over eros, masculine over feminine, ego over self. The cost is alienation, fragmentation, and unfulfilled potential. To engage women as equal, by contrast, is to embrace the archetypal reality of the psyche, to honor the feminine, both within and without, and to participate in the great work of individuation. In this partnership, man and woman together become mirrors of the self, each reflecting the other's path toward integration, and each contributing to the creation of wholeness that transcends the limits of the individual ego.